at BuzzFeed.com, which means that I'm in charge of our hard-hitting cute animals section, and also that I got to make up my own stupid title. And I'm also the editorial director, which is a title I did not get to make up, and which means loosely that I'm in charge of the part of BuzzFeed's editorial team that focuses on making particularly entertaining content that people are going to share on Facebook, so the lists and the quizzes and the 90s nostalgia and the cats. But I'm also, the reason I'm here today is something that's dear to my heart. I started at BuzzFeed as the community manager, as David said. And I think community is something that has always been really, really important to BuzzFeed. But it's sort of flown under the radar a little bit. And I think that when people talk about BuzzFeed, they talk about our editorial content, and sometimes they talk about our ad stuff, and they'll talk about our tech. But community has been really essential to the way that we think about editorial. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of community and how it started at BuzzFeed, and sort of some of the principles that we developed along the way, particularly from making content that involves community in a way that we wouldn't be able to do editorially. So for making these sort of fun, rich projects that involve community engagement. And also I want to talk a little bit about sort of where we are now and some of the problems that we have trying to figure out what exactly it is that we want from our community, which I think in some ways the community of BuzzFeed is still very much an experiment, and we kind of know what we're doing editorially. And community, which I think is fun for the team, is a thing that is kind of constantly evolving, and figuring out what that means is one of the challenges. So here's a little BuzzFeed history. This is what the site looked like back in the old days when I started in 2008. It's got that nice 2-column layout I kind of miss. And the tagline was "Find your new favorite thing." And we focused a lot on this idea of content as a gift, sort of something that was fun, that was a new discovery, something cool and new that you could share with your friends, or that colleagues could share with each other, sort of at the office water cooler, something new and interesting that was a gift that you could give. And so I started at BuzzFeed in 2008. I think there were 8 of us at the time. And I was hired on as the community manager. But the thing is that nobody told me when I started was that BuzzFeed didn't have a community. So my first principle is just a really simple one, but it's worth remembering. It will save a lot of anguish. Is actually tell your community manager what your goals are. And it took me a little while to figure out that in fact there was no community to manage when I started, and in fact the role was building a community. But once we figured that out, things got a little bit easier, and I was able to really think about what we needed to do to build a community. And I didn't think about it in this particular way at the time. I don't think I conceptualized it in this way. But looking back, the most useful stuff that I did in trying to build a community was thinking about the feedback mechanisms that were available to us. And what I mean by that is that the community that started to develop on BuzzFeed that kind of made sense was people who saw themselves as sort of aligned with the site, in that they were similar to the editors, in that they were the kind of people who were finding the cool cat video sort of 2 weeks before anybody else saw it, who saw Gangnam Style or whatever before it was on the Today Show, or like the kind of people who were trend spotters. And so kind of figuring out how to get those people interacting with the site. The most useful way to get those people to us and to keep them making things for us was thinking about feedback. And so I think this is going to be different for any community, but for us, briefly, that was just email. I emailed with every single person who signed up for the site and posted something to thank them, or to give them tips, or to talk about sort of how they could use the site in an optimal way. Promotion, I think we discovered pretty early on, when you make something, especially if you sign up for a platform and you make something and you spend all this time building it and then you post it and then literally nothing happens, I think that's kind of a bad experience. And so figuring out a way to make sure that something would happen after people had kind of used the platform. And the best way to do that was to take the good stuff and kind of fix it up and promote it, and use our reach, which at the time was fairly small, but people who loved this site, were sort of dedicated users of the site, would see the community stuff on the front page, and I think that made a huge difference. And then the third piece of feedback that was really useful for us was these sort of collaborative projects, which is kind of hard to do, but getting the editors to think about how to make content in a way that would involve community and that could only work with community. So an example of sort of what these collaborative content did for us is something that is still, I think, very much at the core of what BuzzFeed is, which is this spirit of play. We started off as a content lab, where we were just very interested in trying to figure out what kinds of things would go viral, what kind of things people would want to share, and why it was that people were sharing them. And to make that work, we had this sort of strong sense of experimentation. And really trying a lot of things and giving our editors room to try things that would maybe ultimately fail was really important, and to try a lot of things and see what would work and kind of iterate in the direction of the stuff that was successful. And Community was this sort of, at the time we only had 1 or 2 editors, so Community was this sort of expanded playground where people were trying all these sorts of kind of really, really interesting things. And then we could spend a lot of time working with community to sort of figure out ways to play on a bigger scale, I think, than what we were doing editorially. So an example of the early stuff that we did to kind of play around with community stuff is these collections. We built these little collections that people could respond on BuzzFeed with media. So we would build these collections around an experience, like the experience of getting a song stuck in your head, or an emotion. Here's one we did that was sort of to have people upload sort of something that made them happy, so that we could create a place on the internet that was a sort of a safe space from the terrifying nightmare that the internet can sometimes become if you're not careful. And the reason I bring those things up is if you think about what BuzzFeed is now. Here's a post a community member made fairly recently that's around the same concept, that's around this experience. And here's one from one of our editors. There he goes. That was one of our most popular posts from last year. That's this same concept of sort of building a post around media that's based on an emotion. And so in a lot of ways, the stuff that we were doing with community and the experiments that we were doing with community became sort of proto-versions of the things that we were able to do editorially. So I think the community is something that people don't talk about, that aspect of what community did for BuzzFeed, but it's been super important for us. And I think that the lesson from that is to remember that giving community feedback is one thing that's been super useful for us, as I talked about, but remembering that the feedback goes both ways, and listening to our community and sort of creating an environment whereby community can kind of experiment and evolve your platform. And listening to that and then kind of going with that is something that's been really valuable for us. And so an example of that, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Young Disaster Girl. Is this wonderful young lady who was caught posing sort of with the wrong expression given the thing that was happening behind her. So this was really early on, I think, when I first started at BuzzFeed. We posted this. As we did at the time, we sort of found these kind of cool things that sort of had potential for people to share on the web, and an editor posted it. But because we had kind of created this sense of play with the community and got people into the habit of collaborating on posts and extending content, somebody... I love that a Windows Vista joke still plays in 2014. But a community member took Disaster Girl and kind of posted her over this. And from that, and because we were listening to them, we were able to kind of encourage that and promote that to the front page and get people to start doing it. And Disaster Girl took on a life of her own. And I think she's, in some ways now, she's a big part of it's just a part of internet lore. And she has, because of BuzzFeed's community and because of the larger web community that got involved in this awesome game, she's developed this sort of like terrifying and worrying, and it turns out Disaster Girl has been around for a long time. And then we were able to kind of take all that stuff that our community was making and then tell this worrying tale of where Disaster Girl had been. That was something that was, and the cool thing about this that I really love about Disaster Girl is it started off as this kind of two-dimensional thing that was just somebody found a cool picture and posted it, and it became this three-dimensional thing that was this sort of rich experience, and that there was this story that could only have happened because our community kind of got involved. So thinking about Disaster Girl and kind of projects like that, we tried a lot, especially in the early days, to figure out ways to get community involved in a way that would make things like this. And the mechanics of it could be really, really difficult. And I think my best piece of advice for trying to do a project like this is to think about the different levels of response that you're going to get from community. And so if you're actually building a project, doing a gut check on what you would say, if somebody asks you a question, whether you would respond to it, what the barrier to entry is really useful. And there are a lot of different sort of equally valuable levels of response that you can get from community. One of them is if the project you're doing is for the response's own sake, for volume. You can ask a really simple, boring question like that, and it's really easy to respond. You're going to get a ton of responses, and sometimes that's actually the goal with community. You want to get people engaged, and you don't care about the output. But if you ask a bunch of people for their opinions, for instance, you're going to get a bunch of opinions, and I think that that ultimately is maybe not the most interesting thing, and the signal to noise is going to be kind of a bummer of a ratio there. But you can do stuff that is designed to get a volume of response that's high if you think about what you're going to put into it on the other end. And an example of that is a game that we like to play on BuzzFeed that's called the Control-V game, and it's literally you just take whatever happens to be saved into your clipboard at the time and paste it in the comments. And so the volume is really high because the barrier to entry is almost zero. You just have to have a computer and have saved something in your clipboard and hit Control-V. But the thing that's interesting that happens is people tend to have, a lot of things that people have saved in their clipboard are like links or just a string of numbers. But sometimes people have just the weirdest stuff. And so the things that come out of these Control-V games can be these like really interesting insights into what somebody's doing at work or what's going on at home. And once we realize that you're getting this high volume of stuff and there's this kind of gold that's happening in there, we can put something into it from the editorial side and make it into something a little bit more interesting. And so we had one of our illustrators take these Control-V responses. So that's an example of volume of an example of how to get a high volume of response and how to maybe make that work. But a more difficult but more rewarding way of thinking about response mechanisms is actually thinking about the product itself. Actually thinking about something where the responses themselves are going to be what creates the value. And so thinking about quality and designing something so that the responses that people give you themselves when people scroll through the comments and look at what the community is doing, that's going to immediately be rewarding. And so this is an example, you may be familiar with this. An example of my favorite version of this particular thing. It's a project by Zay Frank, who is currently BuzzFeed's executive vice president of video. But at the time, I think this was in 2006 or 7, he was a beloved video blogger, and also I think one of the most interesting innovators in that how to sort of build projects with community that are similar to what this is. And this is called Young Me Now Me. And what I love about Young Me Now Me is it's just how simple of a game it is in terms of the mechanics. They're literally just 2 rules. Find a photo when you were young, and then recreate that photo as you are now. And the cool thing about that is the barrier to entry is fairly low. You just need a camera. But within that, you can either just take a picture. You can take a picture of yourself and try to recreate the same expression from when you were young, or you can get really creative with it and go to the same place where the original photo was taken and get the lighting exactly right and sort of buy the same outfit. And so the stuff that people were making in response to this was just unbelievable. And there's just so much of it. You'll see it all over the internet. But here are a few of my favorites. So the thing that I love about this particular project is if you look at the range of stuff that people are creating, it's up to Zay knew when he made the game that he was going to get this sort of thing. But what the community members, what Zay's community of sort of fans and other video bloggers made, that that was so awesome. It had this incredible range of emotion, from stuff that's totally absurd to stuff that's really, really funny, to stuff that's actually kind of moving and poignant. And the Young Me Now Me it's up to the community what it is, but it's sort of this really well-designed thing, so that you know that the product is going to be a good thing at the end of it. And then the third and sort of the final thing I want to talk about in terms of thinking about response mechanism is, in some ways, it's a hybrid of the two, and it's thinking about the narrative. It's thinking about making something that's going to be for the story at the end, and not about the individual responses, but it's going to be about what the narrative is that people tell about your community project. And this is an example of this. A guy called Len, who is a longtime community member at BuzzFeed, I think in 2012, wrote into me and said something like, I'm planning, you can read it here, but I'm planning on proposing to the love of my life. Would you be willing to sort of help me do this on BuzzFeed? So we thought this was an interesting idea, and we had Len create this sort of meme sort of image macro and post it on the site. And then sort of, I was able to go and take our core community members who are kind of used to playing this sort of playing fun games on BuzzFeed, and write to them and tell them that this sort of secret project was going to happen at a certain time, and to be prepared to kind of respond as soon as it happened. And so Len's hopeful fiancée, Katie, was told that she should go look at BuzzFeed at a certain time of day. And when that moment hit, we changed all the badges at the top of our site to be this proposal, and people could click through, and they would end up on a page that just had this picture of Len that they could do with as they pleased. And people got really into it. They really wanted to help Len out. Kind of dates it, but so I give this as an example of a cool community project. I'm not necessarily recommending it as a way of proposing to somebody you love in your life. You really have to know the person and know whether that's something that they would like. But so as not to leave you hanging, Katie did like it, and she said yes. So for all I know, they're still together. But the cool thing about that, and my point about that, is that the individual responses maybe were kind of interesting in and of themselves, but the real thing that this was about was creating a story at the end of it, and it really caught the internet's imagination in a way that sort of people got really excited about the fact that community had come together and made this really cool thing happen for this couple. And so these are some of the highlights of stuff that we've done at BuzzFeed that have been fun community collaborative projects. But it's not the stuff that's happening every day. The stuff that sort of, sometimes it will go a little while between something like this, and usually what the day-to-day interaction on the site is with community members, people who are creating stuff for BuzzFeed, is that they're looking at what the editors are doing, and they're doing sort of similar BuzzFeed-style posts to what the editor's doing. Here's a yawning sloth. But what's cool about it's cool to see this, but in some ways it's not the optimal use of community. I think that the editors already know sort of how they have the tools. They know exactly where to find the finest sloth gifs on the internet. They're experts at that. And so having community just doing what editors are doing is great, but it's not an example of these projects that are hugely successful and capture the web's imagination. But the thing for me, and this is something that I've learned and my community team has learned sort of the hard way, is this particular trick, which is that you need to think about what the community is that you have, and not necessarily what the community is that you want it to be. And what I've found is that if you're really, really focusing on what your community is giving you, rather than sort of some idealized version of what you want out of community, those things get closer. And the thing that they end up giving you ends up being something that is sort of closer to your ultimate goals. And so it's this thing I was talking about in terms of feedback, actually listening to what community is giving you and going with that and making it work. And an example of that is here's a post that I'm not sure if we ever promoted this on the site, but this is an example of somebody taking the BuzzFeed style and taking BuzzFeed's platform and making a BuzzFeed post that was designed literally for just one person. So I don't know in this case whether she went to prom with him. So, but but they made a post that was using our platform just for one person, which is something our editors would never do. Our editors are sort of are geared towards making something that's going to go viral over the wider web. So once we sort of encourage community and sort of give them this feedback and educate them about sort of what the best practices are for making posts, and we sort of encourage them by promoting the things like the sloth gifts and sort of featuring them on the site, you start to see these cool mutations. You can start to see these sort of cool minor evolutions of using our platform that we never would have thought of, or maybe we wouldn't do, that are really kind of interesting in and of themselves. And so as an example, you might see a BuzzFeed post from an editor that's something like 57 things you would only understand if you lived in New York. But you never see something from an editor that was just for one university, or getting smaller than that, just for one high school. I feel like everybody in Mill Valley High School read that post. And for me, even though that's not massively viral, I think that's kind of that's a huge success. It's the community kind of taking our platform and making something for their community. And to me, that's the optimal use of BuzzFeed. And so the lesson from this is just that, to kind of, if you're constantly keeping an eye out for the outliers, for the sort of the little mutations that happen in your community, the things that you didn't expect, sometimes really cool things can happen out of that. Which brings me back to our friend Disaster Girl. And the thing about Disaster Girl that's cool is that she only happened because we were doing that, because we were looking at our community and listening to them and sort of getting feedback from them, and we had created an environment where they were sort of willing to play, and also were geared ourselves to take what they had done and kind of go with it and iterate in the direction of that and see what happened. And I think it's not an accident that Disaster Girl is still on our 404 page when you get an error message on BuzzFeed, just as a nice reminder that sometimes when you take a wrong turn and everybody just decides to go with you, that's when the coolest stuff happens. Thank you.